Laura, can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Cool.
can definitely hear you. I promise this time.
Cool. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Index's Beyond Pride Month. I am here today. My name is Matt Phelan. I'm co-founder of the Happiness Index. We're having an internal webinar today. I'm here with Kashi and Laura, who I'll get them to introduce themselves in a second. But today we're talking about Beyond Pride Month, daily practices for inclusive workplaces. We'll get into that today, but it's all about making sure that the work that we do for Pride doesn't just live in that week or in that day or in that month, and then we carry the work on throughout the year. So we'll be getting into more detail on that. So what is the Happiness Index? If you're new, if you've never met Laura, Kashi, or myself before, we're an employee engagement and happiness platform. Within the survey is lots of tools that will help you understand how people feel on all subjects, from things like inclusivity through to mental health. And we would say the real differentiator is it not only helps you understand how your people think, but it also helps you understand how your people feel. But that's enough about the happiness index today. And I'm going to get my colleagues back by clicking stop share. And I'm going to say, hello, Kashi and Laura, how are you?
Hi, Matt. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm looking forward to getting into this subject. How are you doing, Kashi?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Feeling good, excited.
Cool. So, Laura, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, I'm Laura. I'm a people partner at the Happiness Index. My pronouns are she or her. I noticed actually at the beginning of this webinar that I didn't have that included in my name title, and it's something that I do feel really passionately about as part of the inclusivity topic that we're going to be talking about. So I made a quick change there, that seeing as my Zoom profile didn't automatically do it. And the work that I do at the Happiness Index as a people partner for the people and culture team is very generalist, but largely centers around ensuring that our people have the environment that they need to be happy and engaged at work.
Thanks, Laura. And Kashi?
Hiya, I'm Kashi. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm the community and events exec. So I basically coordinate and run a lot of our webinars and in-person events. I do a lot of our social media stuff and work on our community on LinkedIn, which is really good and really fun. And I love it.
My pronouns are he, him. I've got more work to do on that. Firstly, I didn't include it in my description today. I'm not going to hit record and redo it, but I've got used to introducing myself with that, but I've not got to 100% of listing it on everything. So I'm already learning from this session already. So I suppose that proves everyone's on a journey, aren't they?
Yeah.
Okay, so Akash, I'm going to go to you first. Why is it important? Because Pride, it gathers a lot of momentum around this subject, doesn't it? But why is it significant to make it like year round? Like why is that important? Why are we here today to discuss it?
Well, I think, anyone can sort of slap a rainbow on their branding and say that they're an ally and be like, oh, yay, pride. But, the actual work that is involved, within making your organization inclusive for the people that work there, putting out that message to people you might be recruiting, people who use your product or use your service. That's the real work, is making it a safe place for people of the community. And doing the work in Pride Month is quite like performative, and that's not something that anyone should ever really strive for, is performative action. We want it to be embedded in day-to-day culture.
Yeah, and I suppose just latching onto some of the phrase around a safe space, you can't just be a safe space for 1 week a year and not the other 51. If I think
100%.
about it, if I put my CEO hat on, that's my worst nightmare when I think about it. If you forget about the subject, having employees not feeling safe, and that's how I translated what you said into my head. So it's really useful. Laura, you're obviously looking after the people at the Happiness Index. For you, I think, like, even in like the notes that Cassie sent before when we were preparing, Pride is great because it's a celebration, and that it creates that awareness. But Laura, for you, what is the significance by making it year round? Anything to add to what Cassie said?
I think Cassie makes a really good point that it's easy to be performative and make these kind of token gestures, or do something that feels a little bit tick boxy when it comes to these celebration times of year. And thinking about things like Pride Month, I think they do these special times of the year, special days that are dedicated to things like Pride Month is. I know we have Black History Month, we have Mental Health Awareness Month, we have lots of these celebration and awareness times of year. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's really great to have an opportunity to celebrate what we are doing to be inclusive, and also celebrate the fact that we can be really open, and that there are people, that there is progress that's being made. But I think it's a very individual experience that different people who do identify as LGBTQ+ have, and you can't assume that everybody who might identify that way feels the same. Not everybody is out and proud and wanting to celebrate it openly with their employer or in their environment. There are people that are still kind of on a journey with it, and that's one reason. I mean, there are lots of reasons, but that's one reason why I think it can't just be about that time of year and that opportunity to celebrate. It needs to be something that all organizations are baking into their culture. What you just mentioned, Matt, that element of safety and people feeling safe, not just to be out and proud, but also to go on that journey and be able to explore their own identity in that way, in the workplace, outside the workplace. So I think, to circle back round, I think celebration months like Pride Month, great. We should be celebrating the fact that we have an amazing, diverse workforce, but it can't just be about that celebration point. It also has to be about lots of other things, which I'm sure we'll come to talk about in this conversation.
I think I was at an event for a DE&I book that was released this week, called Bias as a Genius. And one of the things that was really interesting listening to there was some really sort of like prominent people from the community there talking about bringing your whole self to work, but only the parts that you feel comfortable doing so. And I just want to, Cassie, I just want to pick on Laura's point there around sharing what you're comfortable to do, because there are some people that are going to be happy to be showcasing and talking about this area. But there's also people that may not want to share certain sides at work. How does that all work together, Cassie?
I think, like, everyone's got different ideas of what they want to showcase. For some people, coming to work, you want to share every aspect of yourself. And for some people, it's just coming to work. And, they're not there to like make friends and build that kind of, full picture of themselves at work, because they want to maintain that professional boundary. And that's okay. That's absolutely fine. It's literally no one else's business but yours, your sexuality, your gender identity. You don't have to share that. That is completely your prerogative. And I 100% support that, in the same way that I support, walking into work and being like, yo, I'm gay, like, love that. And I mean, everyone at the Happiness Index knows what I'm like. I walk into a room screaming that I'm bisexual. I love it. And it's, it's a huge part of my identity, and it's not something that I want to leave at the door when I come to work. And so I think attempting to have like a blanket one fits all sort of prescription for work is really difficult, because everyone has a different idea of what they want to bring to work.
Yeah, and I think that brings me nicely back to Laura around practically, because it sounds great, doesn't it? Like, just, I mean, the Happiness Index vision is freedom to be human. It talks to this, but also a lot of people listening, they're HR professionals that are also trying to establish ways of working and so on. How do you create an environment, Laura, where everyone can be themselves and an environment can adapt to everyone from every background? Is because that is that difficult? Talk us through that, Laura.
Well, just to circle back round to what Kashi was saying there about people having a very individual experience of who they want to be at work, and of their own identity and what parts of that they bring up in different spaces. I think something we talk about at the Happiness Index, and a framework that we use to understand that what I spoke about at the start, that's very much part of my job, in that we're trying to create an environment where people can be happy and engaged in the way that they choose to be. And the theme that is really showing up in what you're saying there, Kashi, is around our like instinctive needs as humans. So the needs of our instinctive brain. We use neuroscience as neuroscience methodology that underpins our framework, and it's the needs of the instinctive brain are around the need for freedom, which is about that level of acceptance and authenticity, and the ability to be free to bring as much of yourself as you want to in the workplace, and also that safety need for feeling like you have an environment that you have that degree of psychological safety to either bring up that part of yourself or not. So those two needs are so important. And when we're thinking about as HR people, as people professionals, how we can be sure that we're creating that environment, it's not an easy fix. It's not something that you can just do in a tick box activity by celebrating Pride Month. But it's something that you need to bake in over time. So when we're talking about the needs of the instinctive brain for that freedom and safety, you're thinking about how you bake that into your whole culture. A really good way of doing that might be to do a cultural assessment survey, which helps find out how you're doing in all of those areas. And something like that might flag, actually, we've got a group of people who really aren't feeling free and safe to be their true self at work. And once you've got some data behind that, you can then dig down into it and figure out what you can do in your people practices, what's not going so well, and what you can do better. So that's a way that you can do it in a more data-driven way. There are so many things that we at the Happiness Index think about when we're thinking about baking in that safety, from a really like practical perspective, having policies that that have that like clear more like operational level of like proving what your organization is about. Is one way that you could do that. I'm sure we'll come on to that more later on, but even things like the relationships that you have between your different employees, if you feel like you've got good relationships and there are people in your environment that you trust, you're going to feel more safe to be your true self at work, or be that self that you want to be at work. To just name a couple.
Obviously you mentioned the cultural assessment, which is a product within the Happiness Index. Can you just talk us through, not the product, but when you do things like this, you're not always going to find the good news. People often fear like, well, if I run an inclusivity survey or I run a safety survey, I'm actually going to find out a lot of stuff that necessarily the business doesn't want to find out. The way I always look at it is the people already know this stuff anyway. So if you're the CEO or HR director, you better know about it, because you can then help and be part of it. But for people that are listening that fear finding out what's actually going on, and it can be, let's just talk about it broadly. When you find out stuff, because I make a big point of reminding everyone the Happiness Index is not perfect. Our culture is not perfect. We're working hard on it ourselves every day. And when you found stuff that people are unhappy about in our organization, how do you take that forward? Because I know a lot of companies fear that, like, especially when we speak to them and their new clients, they're like, oh, what if we find this out? Or it could be a racism issue in there, or we could be experiencing homophobia, and then suddenly we've got to deal with it. Like, when you find out these serious things, how can you turn it into a positive?
I think even the fact that people are willing to be honest and open about how they're feeling with you is a positive thing, because if you're not listening and giving people channels to express how they're feeling, then you're not going to be able to even begin to think about how you tackle it.
Yeah.
So straight off, I think framing that as a positive in itself. If you have a culture where people don't trust that you're going to do anything, and again, completely agree with you, Matt. We're not perfect at the happiness index, and I think it's impossible to be. But we're at least trying to do that work and trying to listen to people. I think there are organizational cultures where people wouldn't feel safe to even say that, and those are the kind of cultures that are going to have higher turnovers, where employees aren't going to be as happy.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
It does. It's because getting it, I suppose, acknowledging that something is there and something is wrong is the first part, but then it's you moving it forward from there, and it does. And it makes me want to bring Kashi in on a point here. I was at the book launch that I mentioned earlier. Someone there gave an example that they described themselves in their organisation as the person said he describes himself at work as a queer male, and he I don't know his exact age, but he's not Gen Z. He's at least a generation or two above Gen Z. And he said he had a complaint from someone who describes himself as a gay male who's Gen Z in his organization, and the complaint referenced that the person who the older person who referred to himself as a queer male, the Gen Z person said that's homophobic, and felt that homophobic behavior at work. So it's one thing getting to the issues and the problems, but sometimes you end up with people that got very different views, and this will be happening in every organization. We've got an election around the corner. We've got Trump versus Biden in America. We've got stuff happening all over the place. How do you, when you've got people with very different views on a subject like pride and inclusivity, how do you make that work on a day to day? Because who's right in that? I don't know who's right in that scenario. How does that work?
I don't think there's any sort of right answer in that. You know, the person who refers to themselves as queer is absolutely free to do so, and that's, you know, them taking back and reclaiming a word that had previously been used in a really derogatory sort of slur manner, and using it for themselves, reclaiming that, taking the power back, and, you know, using that for themselves. And in the same way that there are still, you know, there's a lot of people within the community that do refer to themselves as queer, myself being one of them. And there are lots of people that still do find the word very uncomfortable, and that's also absolutely valid. I think it really depends on your own personal experiences, your environment you grow up in, that kind, like, there's so many different factors, and I think that's something that really needs to be considered in terms of when we're putting things into place, when we're trying to think about all these you know, policies, and trying to think about how we're building this culture of safety, is that, you know, it's okay for you to have differing opinions even within the community. It's okay. What's not okay is to silence anyone. You know, unless you are being outwardly, like, you know, hateful, in which case please sit down and shut up. But you know, the way I refer to myself is not me referring to anyone else in that way. I wouldn't, you know, I ask people how they like to be referred to before I do. How would you describe yourself? How would you describe your identity, your sexuality, your anything? Because I don't want to make an assumption. And I think that's the main root of so many different problems, is people making assumptions.
So, I think that's a really powerful point. I have a similar conversation with my mother-in-law about swearing, because I'm pro swearing, anti swearing at someone. She's just anti swearing. She's anti swearing altogether. Like, swearing is really bad in her mind. I think it's really bad if you swear at someone, but I'm okay if someone feels frustration and they want to swear. But I'm not going to fall out with her over it. I understand that exactly. She's got a different opinion on that, and I'm not going to try and silence her by. So it's fascinating. I think Tim Hardy-Lennox, who wrote "Bias Was a Genius," what the book I was referring to earlier, he talked about this subject in terms of. He said this is the one area that cancel culture can't exist because employees need to be able to raise questions and talk about it freely from all different points of view. Otherwise, you just end up with it's a non-conversation. He described it, and people need to feel safe to be able to ask questions like about on this subject. So I just thought I would just bring that into that from what Tim was saying before we go on to the next question. Laura, before we do anything that you want to add to that.
Yeah, just to go back to what Kashi was saying there, I think that it's so easy for us to I had such a what were you talking about before, Kashi?
About people making assumptions.
People making assumptions. Yeah, I think it goes back to that, the power of language. I think language is so powerful, and it's so personal. And like the example that you gave there of Matt, of somebody really owning the word queer as part of how they identify, and somebody else not doing so. And I think another thing that's really valuable about times like LGBTQ plus Pride Month, is it's a chance for us to open the dialogue around it and find out where people differ in how they perceive language, how they use language themselves, what they understand language to mean. And I think having a culture where people trust one another and they feel safe to be vulnerable also is feeling safe to feel vulnerable to get it wrong, or just to be open about where your perceptions are different. And again, it's like what you're saying with swear words. It's like if you use different language but you don't use it against each other to weaponize each other, then that's okay. If there's that acceptance that actually we can kind of agree to disagree. Like language is powerful, but it also can be reductive if you're using it to label the whole LGBTQ plus community. Even like the name itself captures how heterogeneous and how diverse that group is. I mean, just by the letters and the plus, like it's not as simple as just like this group, they're all like this. And a way that you can put that into practical use is in policies, as I was mentioning before. I think there's obviously discrimination law, which is something that legally you're not allowed to discriminate against your LGBTQ plus employees, and the law is kind of kept up with the times through case law, but the actual original legislation itself can be a little bit behind the times because the language hasn't been evolved. And something that we've done with our family friendly policy is include a disclaimer at the start which says there's going to be some language in here that is not really very us. Like it might feel a little bit alien to the culture that that we have at the Happiness Index, because there are some things that we have to do by law, and obviously not discriminating is a very basic level of and obviously there are lots of complexities, and but just for the sake of this conversation, like we're not discrimination law we would hope is something that we would just automatically not have to deal with, because our culture is based on that equity, respect, inclusivity. But what our policy says is we understand that in the law you have maternity policy and you have paternity policy, but we recognize that families aren't always as simple. They aren't a one-size-fits-all model. There's going to be a lot of variation in that. We don't assume that you adopt these terms to describe your own families. When we refer to like caregivers, I think something that's quite effective for writing the policies that we have here is that we use quokka as a term, which is very gender neutral. For those of you who don't know, we call our employees quokkas because they're supposed to be the most happy animal on the planet, which is an all-inclusive term that isn't gendered, so that's helpful.
I love that.
When someone came up with the name Quokka as a joke, they never realised that that it had that benefit.
I hope it's not. Anyway, do we know that? Is it gendered?
You don't know. We actually don't know whether a quokka is just referring to a male.
A quokka, I'm pretty sure both, like anyone is a quokka. Any quokka can, yeah. And the same
Definitely
way,
in
like,
our THI vocabulary.
yeah, I love it, and I love that when we have babies and like there's new babies in the organization, we refer to them as Joeys.
Oh,
Yeah.
don't do too much research into it though, because I've heard on the grapevine that quokkas aren't actually too good to their offspring.
Oh,
But
quokkas are terrible to their offspring, but
yeah.
yeah.
But not here, not our kind of quokka.
No.
So off the quokkas. Going back to actual, back to actual practical. So you actually flag. You're saying in policy at the Happiness Index, Laura, you actually flag when we have to say something for legal reasons, but it may be different in terms of how we actually think and feel as an organisation. Is that right? Because that's quite a big thing. It's quite a big thing to say.
So the difference is not necessarily, it's not that the thing we're saying isn't true, but it's the language that we're capturing it in is not necessarily the language we would choose to do. Yeah. So going back to that point I was making about language being really powerful.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of trying to capture the nuance behind what we're saying, that we're not going to put a mother into a box and assume that that mother is going to be part of a like a heterosexual nuclear family, and we're not making any assumptions about what that family might look like.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, even when my daughter was born, I didn't know the difference between maternity and paternity. I didn't even know. So everyone was like, "Oh, what are you up to?" I'm going on maternity leave, and everyone laughed at me, but I didn't actually know. I thought it was kind of it was a strange concept to me that there would even be different. And then obviously I had to learn about it and realize, and that's why there's certain places in the world that are doing so much more to equalize that out, aren't they? And not make the assumption that the woman will take maternity leave, which will be a longer period of time, and the man will take paternity leave in a traditional relationship. So it's this whole thing is changing and evolving as in a good way in the UK. But it does bring me on to another issue that our clients experience, which is we've talked very about a UK business here. We have, and again, this came up at the event that I was at. We set what we expect here in the UK, but lots of HR directors are dealing with quite complex legal frameworks in other organisations. I think there are still places in the world where it's illegal to be gay, which is it's absolutely shocking, isn't it? As we sit here today, but it is that way, and that's a real challenge. That's a real challenge for the HR professionals that we're working with, which brings me on to the next point about the importance of data, and collecting data on this and understanding how people feel. And we touched on Laura a little bit. But Laura, how important is it to understand how people feel in an organization?
I mean, I don't know if it's a bit of a cop-out answer to say very important. I think listening to your people, especially when we're talking about things that are very personal, and it might not be something that you necessarily have an easy avenue to discuss with people. So something that is part that we use at the Happiness Index, which is part of our offering, that we part of our product offering, is employee voice. And I think something really powerful about that is it's a channel for people who don't necessarily know what other channel to use, that's constantly open. It's an anonymous survey that we use and find hugely valuable at the Happiness Index. And it means that if there's something that someone's feeling that they don't know what to do with it, they don't know where to put it, they don't know what's the appropriate channel of feedback, who to go to, they can put it in employee voice, and it's picked up by the people and culture team to then either respond to them if they've opened the feedback loop, if they're happy to start a two-way anonymous dialogue, but still anonymous. So if it's something that is uncomfortable for them and they're not willing to come and have a direct conversation or a direct interaction with you, they can keep their anonymity. But it's just adding to that case of like, we're listening, we're here for you, even though you might be going through a difficult time, or you might not see a safe space for yourself. That gives you a place to communicate that. Again, it's a very individual experience. It might be that you're supporting some people with the approach that you're taking, but not others, and it means that no one slips through. You can capture people that might otherwise slip through the nets through that avenue.
Yeah, I think that's so. I double checked to a bit of Google whilst you were talking. So there's 64 countries that have laws that criminalize homosexuality in the world today, and I think the other area that I just want to touch on what Laura was just talking about, the importance of data and understand how people feel. People who listen to this, they might have people that are employees that are working from war zones at the moment. We work with a charity called Halo Trust, where most of their employees clear landmines. So your employees may be operating in legally different places, but you can still give them that human, what we call giving someone a voice. Like, you can still give that employee an opportunity to share how they feel with you as an organization without getting into the legal aspect of it. I've just seen the time. I don't know how this has gone so quick. So we need to go into summary. So I'm just going to go into the last point, which is about the future. What does good look? I'm going to go to you first on it, Kashi. What does good look like in the future? What are we working towards, Kashi?
I would say in the future, and this is already starting to happen, but it's a slow change. But in the future, I would like to see, places really taking into account the types of benefits they give their employees, things like mental health support, healthcare support, with the state of healthcare for, say, for example, for trans people, it is dire. I'm not going to lie to you. Waiting lists are absolutely hell, and to be able to have that kind of support in the workplace would be so invaluable. So to think about the benefits that you're providing for your employees, to think about the policies that you've got in place. No one is trying to erase previous terminology. No one is saying you cannot use terms like mother and father and maternity and paternity, but it's just the introduction of other terms and ensuring that everyone feels included and safe and part of the conversation. Just feeling like more people can feel comfortable to bring that side of themselves to work if they want to.
I love that, Kashi. Very John Lennon, those sentiments. Laura, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. I asked Kashi, what does good look like? I'm going to ask you what great looks like.
Wow. I mean, so much of what Kashi just said captured just how much more there is that we could have talked about here. As you said, Kashi, like, a lot has changed. There's a lot more that can still be done. For me, in an ideal world, all employers would believe in freedom to be human, which is what we talk about at the Happiness Index and what we strive for. Those feelings, those needs of the instinctive brain that I mentioned before, for safety, for freedom, they're so important for people's happiness, not just at work, but in life. And if you have that from your employment, which is where you are spending, what is it, like 70% of your waking hours or something, that's going to be life-changing for so many people. So I think that's my answer.
Okay, and I'm just going to add a point to it for CEOs as a CEO here, which is, I think a lot of CEOs, including myself, are scared to talk about subjects like this. Even though I'm here and I'm comfortable to have this conversation, there's still part of me that is scared. But I know from working with people like Kashi and Laura that these conversations are okay to have. And I'm just speaking to other CEOs, I've only ever felt benefit from overcoming my fear to having a conversation with your team. So I would just say to anyone that is listening, just don't fear having the conversations across your business, because you might look stupid sometimes, which I have a lot, but you will learn so much from it. And I would encourage every leader that's listening to get out there and have these conversations with their teams. It's not as scary as you think. So that's
It
it.
means
That's
so
it.
much to your employees. It means so much, especially to your, like, say for example, for your LGBTQ plus employees, it means so much to us when you do try and have those conversations.
And it shows
Thanks,
other
Steph.
people that it's okay as well. So
Yeah.
So
Do it.
much there that's so good.
Everyone, I just want to say thank you, Kashi, Laura, for coming along, recording this, and we're also talking to ourselves here. We're trying to make sure we're not, as I said, we're not perfect at this. I'm literally listening to these words, thinking, how do we continue? How do we celebrate Pride, but how do we continue it 365 days a year? So we're going to say thank you to everyone attending. If you had any questions, you can find Laura, myself, or Kashi on LinkedIn. Send us a message. If you want to use the Happiness Index to work out how it can help, go to thehappinessindex.com and book a demo. But thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.